So I'm talking to this carrier about a load. I want to move within Canada, and he says he will have to use a 8-axle rig. Now, as you might know, the two biggest things that determine the rate with a heavy haul shipment are the weight and the dimensions, right? Because the weight will dictate how many axles you gotta use, and that will in turn affect how long your rig is, right? So if you're too long, you're gonna use pilots, right? Escort cars or pickup trucks, and that's expensive, right? And the same about the, let's say, height or width. And so how do you check that, right? So how do you make sure that you know how many axles you need, you know? And it's useful to have some kind of an idea about gross weights and what's allowed. And of course, each jurisdiction is different in Canada and US. And lucky for me, I still remember this stuff from when I was trucking. And I have a couple of manuals on my computer. I'm just sitting in front of my computer. So I have this heavy haul manual or guide for most jurisdictions, and I have my little permits folder where I keep some old permits, especially from Canada, because in Canada it's a bit tricky. And then I'm using a website where I'm paying about $50 US, where I can go in and I can put in origin and destination and dimensions and weight, and then the system allows me to choose what kind of trailer I need to use. But again, here I have to know how many axles, because that will show the length, approximate length, and then it breaks down jurisdictions by the cost, and it tells you, you know, is it going to be a police escort or just one escort or no escorts, and do you need a state review or a bridge survey or something like that, you know. So it's very helpful, because permits are a big cost of this heavy haul operation. But to get back to how many axles, right? Because today we're talking about how many axles do you need on an RGN to move a particular shipment. So what I did, I called this permit office, right? And you can quickly Google them, put in the jurisdiction name and then permit office on Google, and usually it'll come up. And not always will they agree to give you this information. They'll just say, hey, you know, just submit an application, and of course then you have to pay, you know. But this lady in this particular Canadian jurisdiction was helpful. So I called in, I said, hey, I'm a former truck, I moved a few loads here, and now I work as broker, and I just a bit hazy how many axles are actually required for your particular jurisdiction. So would you mind telling me the maximum gross weight you can allow on each axle? And the lady says, okay, how big are your tires on the steer axle? And I said, well, what's the largest amount I can get, the heaviest weight? And she says, well, if you have a 445 millimeter tire, we can give you 20,000 pounds. But if you have 425 millimeter tire, meaning the width, all you can get is 18,700 pounds, right? And actually 425, that's big super single. That's what I had on my Kenworth T880, and it was rated for 20. The tires were rated for 20,000, and the actual axle was rated for 20,000 pounds. But many jurisdictions, they go by how wide your tires are, because they give you so much weight per 1 millimeter or 1 inch of the width of the tire. But anyway, that's not very important. But what's important is that she told me that I can get the same as in the States. Typical, this was Canada, but the typical weight you can get is 20,000 pounds on the steer axle, right? If your truck supports that. And then this is Western Canada, so they don't allow 4-axle trucks. Like, they allow tri-drive trucks, but they don't allow pusher axles on trucks. Well, they do allow them, but they're not going to give you any weight. So you have to keep it up. And in old days, they wanted you to even put a chain over it or a strap or just remove the tires, some crazy stuff like that. But nowadays, they don't care. Everybody's running around with these lift axles, even in Alberta, because they use them once they cross into US. Because US gives you less weight per axle than Canada, so you don't need that lift axle in Canada. But once they cross into US, they can get pretty much the same gross weight as in, let's say, Alberta by putting down that axle, right? So it is helpful for other jurisdictions, but so nobody's putting chains over anymore or straps. You just have to know that they're not going to give you any weight. So in this case, you need to use, since you need, let's say, 7 or 8 axles, you need to use a single axle Jeep, right? And then in the back, let's say, Tridem trailer, right? And so that's what I was trying to get. I wanted to get an idea. So how much will I get on a 7-axle rig to make sure that this particular load, which weighs about 73,000 pounds, can be moved on 7 axles and does not actually need 8, which can help me save money for the shipper. And so now, let's say I know she said 20,000 pounds on the front axle, and she said tandem drives and single axle Jeep, max you can get is 63.8. So let's say 64,000 pounds. And the same 63.8 of 64 is allowed on Tridem trailer. So that's the maximum on 7 axles, which is 148,000 pounds, right? That's the maximum gross weight. So now all we need to know is how heavy is the trailer, right? So for my trucking days, when I had a 55-ton trailer, I was 53,000 pounds with my truck and 4-axle trailer. And the flip axle was 3,000. So minus 3, that's 50,000 pounds. And that's heavy because my truck was heavy. I had a dual frame, big engine. Like my Mac, when I had a Mac, I was 47,000 pounds. But let's say 50. Let's say the empty weight, the guy has a truck, because the Jeep is, you know, a truck with a Jeep, it's heavier than just a truck with a pusher axle. How much is the single axle Jeep? I think it's like 4,000 pounds. But even let's say even 53. Let's say the weight with 7 axles is the same as my old 4-axle 55 tons. So let's say, so we have 148,000 pounds gross weight allowed in this particular jurisdiction, and now we deduct, let's say, 54,000 pounds for the truck, and what we have is this: we have 94,000 pounds. You see that number, which is way higher than the weight of my load, which is 73,000 pounds. So this tells us that 7 axles is more than enough for this load, because we have 64 and 64 and 20 minus empty weight, right? And that tells us how many axles we need, you know. And so that's what I wanted to focus on today. So that's how it works, right? That's how we know. Like actually with this load, probably even 6 axles would work. I think it's probably, what do they want? Let's see. So 20 plus, let's say 40 on the drives. and let's say 64 on the back. So with 6 axles, no Jeep, it'll give us 124. So minus, let's say, short truck and 3 axle trailer, let's say 47. So that gives us 77,000 pounds, which is still more than 73, but now we're getting close to the limit, right? So it might be very difficult to load like that because of the you know, where the load has to be positioned on the trailer. So just with the regular truck and 3 axle trailer, it might be there might be a danger of overloading the truck, right? So I would definitely use 7 axles for something like this, just to give me a cushion, you know, and avoid overloading one side, you know, either the truck or the trailer. But after talking to this helpful lady, see, I got the idea, so I emailed the carrier and I said, from the data I have, you do not need an 8 axle rig. And the carrier replied, I don't have a 7 axle rig, all I have is 8. But the thing is, you cannot charge people 8 axle rate if all you need is a 7 axle rig, because you know what you have is irrelevant. You know, if I come over with 10 axles to pick up a 20,000 pound backhoe, I cannot charge them, you know, like 20-25 bucks a mile, because the load does not require that many axles, right? So it's my problem. So let's say I was just looking for a backhoe load just to get back to my home area. Nobody's gonna pay me, you know, $30,000-$40,000 because I'm moving a backhoe, right? So you need to be realistic. And so that was the topic of today's video. I hope it's helpful for people that are getting started as agents or brokers in the freight industry. And that's how you determine how many axles you actually need. Thank you.